I am amazed at the menu they have in space. You can have everything from like sushi to mac and cheese to smuggled alcohol. But the thing is, to get food into space requires so much effort that it makes me question if I would ever even want to go to space at all. Eating in space, you gotta bring the food with you, you gotta like rehydrate the food, you gotta worry about the crumbs, you gotta worry about the texture, you can't ever have anything fresh. And the start of space cuisine was even worse. Now we can have stuff like curry, but this wasn't always the case. On the plus side of eating in space, you can't really spill, but on the minus side, it seems like nothing really tastes all that great. Hey, I'm Niba, and these are my notes on what we can eat in space, also what we could eat in space, and what I hope we'll be able to eat in the space in the future. For more nature-y science like stories and news, you can check out my socials. I'm at NotesByNiba. There you'll find things like how I made this starry makeup look. If you'd like to support me in making more sciencey nature stories, I recently made a Ko-Fi where you can do a little tiny tip anywhere from like $1 to your whole bank account, I don't know. But if you'd like to support in a non-monetary way, or if you'd like to continue to support, you can like the video, comment, and subscribe. At the end of this video, I also have some bonus bits for nerds like you and me, which also includes what happens to the pee that happens in space. Yeah, like astronaut pee. Let's dig into it. Food in space has a bunch of constraints. Step one of eating food in space is you have to be able to get it there. So it needs to be easy to transport, so stuff like hot pot, not gonna really work. And then once it's in space, it needs to be safe for the no-gravity environment. So things that cause crumbs would be absolutely terrible because they would go into like air shafts and clog up the air filters, or maybe a crumb would get into an astronaut's eyeball. Imagine just like choking on a random crumb and you can't get it out very easily because the gravity is making it really hard. So every single piece of bread does not exist. Bread does not exist on the space stations, and it's mostly been replaced with tortillas. So there's a lot of like tortilla PB&J or tortilla sandwich, that kind of thing. But most importantly, it has to be full of nutrients for the astronauts. The beginnings of space cuisine was really just like purees in tubes and dried goods. And in 1961, they really used this like bare minimum approach. The first dude in space was also the first dude to eat in space. His delicious meal came in a tube. His name was Yuri Gagarin, a Soviet pilot. He literally just had a tube full of beef and liver that he sucked up, and then for dessert he had another tube, chocolate sauce, that he also just sucked up. Lovely. But when you're in an area where gravity is just gonna make your food float off, like having some sort of toothpaste tube full of food kind of makes sense. Doesn't leave a mess, easy to clean up, easy to store. Probably not that delicious, but you know, that's the least of your worries when you're out in space. Fast forward to 1969, and bacon cubes were the first food that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had on the moon. They also had dehydrated peaches, fruitcake cubes, and a pineapple grapefruit drink. The peaches were freeze-dried for easy packaging and storage on the flight. The peaches were freeze-dried so they could be easily like packaged and stored for the flight. It's very 1969 cuisine, shall I say. In the 1965 Gemini missions, the astronauts ate freeze-dried meals and powdered drinks, which they just mixed with cold water before they ate it. It's a method that's pretty similar, shockingly similar to what we do now. This brings me to prepping the food for space, which there's so much there. I feel like comparatively, like doing meal prep down here is so much easier. So there's a couple different methods for food prep. The one we're probably familiar with is freeze drying, which also really helps with reducing the weight of the food, which when it comes to like the launch and making sure everything weighs very, 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 very little, this is very helpful. Freeze drying food for space missions involves freezing the food and then placing it in a vacuum. In this low pressure and low temperature environment, the frozen water in the food turns directly from solid to gas in a process called sublimation. This technique removes the moisture in the food, but it also keeps the structure of the food and the flavor pretty intact. It does cost more and it takes longer than some of the other methods, but it's still favored because it keeps the food's original qualities. It also preserves the most nutrients, and it's easier to rehydrate compared to some of these other methods. For things like meat and dairy products that go bad like pretty fast, you have to prep them like in a much more intense way. So one of those ways is irradiating the food with ionizing radiation, although I did learn that people get very scared by this term, and so now astronauts are trained to not say this term because it makes people think that they're eating like radioactive stuff. But I know, and now you know, that this just reduces the risk of microbial contamination. So this is when you expose it to ionizing radiation like gamma rays, X-rays, or electron beams to kill any bacteria, parasites, and insects, which hugely reduces issues with foodborne illnesses in space, like 110% this stuff is definitely dead. So since the food can't like spoil or sprout, it also means it can last really, really, really long. The downside though is that it can change the flavor and the texture and the nutrition of some foods. Win some, lose some. But with some foods, you want them to have a little bit of water in them, so those are classified as intermediate moisture. So they're kind of like softer in texture. So for these items, they go through processes like salting or sun drying, and they don't need any other prep. And they still have a very low quantity of water, like low enough to really limit microbial growth. Then there's thermostabilization, which exposes the items to really high heat or pressure. So any bacteria and microorganisms that can cause spoilage or like foodborne illnesses are for sure dead. Now the food is safe to eat for a very long time, and once the food is like reheated again, it can be sealed in airtight containers to stay sterile and make sure there's no contamination. And these foods keep a lot of their original flavor and their nutrition, but the high heat can kind of alter the texture. But still, this method is really like preferable because then the astronauts can do like very minimal preparation and eat it directly from the packaging, so it's pretty easy to make. So all these methods mean that there's a much bigger range of food that astronauts can select from now. They don't have to just have tubes of meat. Yum. So a lot of the foods now are thermostabilized or irradiated, and they can just be eaten right out of the package. In terms of possibilities, anything that can be kept at room temperature can also be eaten in space. Like some astronauts straight up eat goldfish. Other astronauts eat like the marshmallow fluff that comes in those jars. And when you're up in space, your taste perception supposedly gets much, much worse, which is why a lot of astronauts prefer intensely flavored foods, like things that are very, very sweet or salty or bitter or very spicy. Most astronauts just have 3 meals and snacks throughout the day. The space station has everything from like fresh fruits and veggies to also prepackaged meals and even desserts. You can even have condiments like ketchup and mustard, but for condiments like salt and pepper, those have to be kept in a liquid because if you can imagine, salt and pepper, again, are very similar to just having little tiny dust particles everywhere, and if some pepper just goes and floats on by and goes up someone's nose, that's going to be a big problem. The astronauts generally aim for 2,500 calories a day, but it kind of varies depending on astronaut to astronaut and what they're doing per day. One thing I thought was really cool is that the astronauts get to pick what kind of food they eat up there. So they go to this thing called the food lab where they get to test all the different foods, and then they rank them on a scale from like 1 to 9. 9 being like, I liked this a lot, and 1 being like, that was not that great. And there are so many options for what the astronauts can choose from. There's jerky, there's fruit cups, there's health bars and brownies. There are some options that come dehydrated, so you need to add the water. So those are like the mac and cheese and pasta dishes. Supposedly the mac and cheese is pretty yummy, but something about cheese in space just feels like it wouldn't taste good, but maybe that's just me. The astronauts also get to pick from little snacks. There's candy, there's fruits, there's peanut butter sandwiches, there's nuts. There's one astronaut who really liked to take the tortilla and add the fluffy like marshmallow stuff along with peanut butter to make like a little fluffernutter type of snack. Actually, I've now learned that the space station has a lot of snacks. There's dried fruit, there's animal crackers, there's cookies, potato chips, Rice Krispie treats, chocolates, lifesavers, candy, and gum. Like, so much better than my own fridge, honestly. And then the entrees generally have some type of protein in them. There's chicken, there's beef, there's seafood, and there's various like pasta dishes too. I was pretty stoked to see that there have been vegetarian astronauts too though. So once the mission team and the astronauts all make their selection and the food gets all picked for them, they obviously go up with a bunch of food, but some more food will be coming shortly. About every 2 months, food gets sent up there. There's an automated spacecraft that goes and docks with the ISS, and it's loaded with fresh fruits and veggies and a bunch of these meals. Most of the food is stored in the Zarya and Node 2 modules of the Russian food boxes. Something that's pretty cute is that every country that sends astronauts into space, they tend to bring like the dishes of that country too. So the Russians have a lot of like pickled and spiced perch. And then when China launched into orbit in 2003, they brought Kung Pao chicken and also herbal tea. Japan sent its astronauts with sushi and ramen and rice with ume. Ume is a plum that is very, very yummy. Moving on to drinks, which I found this part very funny. So they mostly drink water, but they also have like fruit juices, lemonade, coffee, tea, that kind of thing. So because there's a chance that someone who's drunk might harm equipment, NASA and the other space agencies decided to just ban alcohol. This was back in like 1972. However, astronauts have been smuggling alcohol onto the space station for years. Sometimes they'll conceal the alcohol in their spacesuit, and other times it'll be in like hollowed out books. I find the lengths that they went to conceal just like a little bit of like liquid absolutely hilarious. Because also I wonder like how much were they even able to take up there? But it's gotta be like such a satisfying feeling after not having had alcohol for months, and then suddenly like some really cool experimental thing happens, or you have a really good day in space and you're just like, time to I don't know, have a beer, have a shot of whiskey, like just to kick back, relax, and just enjoy the view of just the beautiful stars and Earth. But since we plan to send more people up in space, scientists are coming up with more like innovative and flavorful and sustainable options. Because if we want to send humans farther out into space, they're going to be gone for longer. So we need food options that are very lightweight, very nourishing, they require minimal resources and produce minimal waste. And one of those innovations is farming in space. So there's been a lot of plants that have been grown in space, and sometimes astronauts even get to eat them. So there is a garden on the space station. It's called the Vegetable Production System, but it's also known as Veggie. It's about the size of like a carry-on piece of luggage, and it holds about 6 plants. And because air doesn't just like naturally move in space, they have to blow the air around the plants so that plants aren't just sitting in like a vat of their own produced oxygen. This is known as forced convection. There's also no gravity, so you can imagine what that means for when you have to water the plants. So the water literally has to be like injected into where the roots are growing, and then there's like little wicks that carry the water to the seeds, and the seeds also have to be glued in, and then there's like a combo of water and light that makes the seeds sprout, and the seeds also have to be oriented so the plant grows like up, or at least as up as you can get in space, and the roots grow down into the like plant pillow. And although there is sunlight in space, sometimes the space station is in a place where it doesn't get sunlight, and so the plants just have LEDs that give them like blue and red light. So there's LEDs above the plants that produce like red and blue wavelengths, which are pretty optimized for photosynthesis. There's also the advanced plant habitat that's on the station, and that studies the effects of spaceflight on growing crops and also on humans eating those crops. But unlike Veggie, this system is totally closed and totally automated. It's got cameras and like 180 sensors that are constantly interacting with a team that's over in like NASA Kennedy. And so this system requires like very little attention from the crew, but like, you know, the system manages the water, it manages the distribution, the like moving the air around, the moisture, the temperature, all that stuff. And it also has more LED light colors than Veggie. It also has like red and green and blue and white and far red and even infrared. The only time that astronauts have to interact with this is if they have to like take samples out for like freezing or whatever. There's also some research labs that are looking into 3D printed food, which could be pretty cool. I just really hope for a solar punk future where we're able to like live in harmony with nature, and you know, maybe on these like space flights we're like having a little farm and gardening a little bit, and all the waste we make somehow gets turned into like fertilizer for the crops, and every single day people can just like walk through the garden and get a little like mental health boost, and they can also like pick a little fresh strawberry. I just think that would be the most perfect like blend of some sort of like sci-fi concept and also like very idyllic like nature chill vibes. It really bums me out that the space station is planning on shutting down pretty soon. They're planning on like crashing it into the ocean, which is actually like the safest place for it to go. But I really wonder about what the future of humanity exploring space will be like, because, you know, it seems like a lot of it is becoming very commercial and privatized and reserved for the wealthy elite rather than like a little bit more of an equitable process. But fingers crossed, I will endeavor to persevere in creating the future that I wish for humanity. And that's all my notes on what people eat in outer space. And I want to give a special thanks to Marian and Cabello for helping research this video. If you enjoyed this video or you're interested in hearing more stories of nature, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. But if you didn't, thanks for watching anyway, and let me know what I can do to make it better for you. All right, now welcome to the bonus bits for nerds. So as we talked about, it is very hard to get stuff up in space, so they need to be able to recycle every single bit of water that goes up there. Yes, that includes urine. So the American astronauts on the space station drink filtered urine. And it is really just water, but calling it filtered urine makes it a little bit more spicy, I don't know. And they don't just recycle the urine, they also recycle their sweat, because truly it is such a precious resource up there. And I'm honestly pretty impressed. They're able to recover 98% of that water. That's pretty good. She's in her own tiny little space station. Good job, osmosis. Thank you for cleaning yourself so I don't have to do it for you. There was also the Deep Space Food Challenge, where people proposed different solutions for feeding astronauts on these like long-term missions. So NASA started this challenge back in January 2021, and some of these submissions were absolutely wild. My favorite is one where they used the carbon dioxide that people exhaled to make alcohol. How useful. We should have that here on Earth. There's also a self-contained unit that could grow different veggies or even insects. Like black soldier flies. Black soldier flies are a pretty promising protein source, and they take up obviously very little space because they're flies, not fries. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next page.